once again, race fans. It's been a while. Welcome back to the Dropping the Hammer Racing Hour. And, it's been a while, but there's certainly a lot to cover. First of all, though, to introduce ourselves, I'm Alex Gray, along here with Michael Klein. And our special guest today, we have Mr. Bobby Markos from Lost Speedways joining us. Thank you, Bobby, for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be with you all today.
Yeah, when we were looking for another guest for today's show, I immediately thought, Bobby would also be a good fit, because obviously we've known each other for a while. And of course now you're making a name for yourself here in NASCAR as well as dirt racing. So.
Yeah, not intentionally, but I have made a bit of a name, but. You know how it is. We're race fans first and foremost, so we're just excited to go to races, excited to talk about racing and read about racing and study racing, and it's cool to see that in this racing climate where racing is progressing so fast and we're moving so quickly into the future, there's still a lot of fans who appreciate history and want to talk about history and watch a show like Lost Speedways, which is, all about racing's history.
Yeah, and obviously I'm sure a lot of people will know Lost Speedways for the show on Peacock now with Dale Jr., but I'm sure what not a lot of people know is that Lost Speedways has been a theme for a while. I remember you and Matt Dillner, sorry. I remember you guys worked on this project, I think, back when I first started at the Hall of Fame and met you guys there, which would have been, I think, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. I think that it has been about 8 years since I've met Matthew and been working with him, on the project. I think that he's had it going maybe a little bit before that because, by the time I found him, I discovered his Facebook page he had for it, and it already had quite a following. So I think he had already, done a lot of the legwork for getting it established, and obviously he was a known personality from, he was, a cameraman for NASCAR at the time and was on camera doing a lot of on-camera bits and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. So, he was pretty well known. So he had quite a platform, and he was also, like I said, he was interested in the subject, and he kind of just hit the ground running with it.
Yeah, it's certainly really cool to hear. That was the first time I had ever heard of Matthew Dillner. I'd always known of Bob, and, then hearing about this project, and I was thinking, he's got a brother involved in racing too? Oh.
Yeah, Matt was historically the behind-the-scenes guy. Him and Bob grew up in the Long Island, NASCAR modified scene, and, Bob got into broadcasting, and he wanted to do his own show for their local, public access station, and they wanted to do a show about modifieds, a little segment, and they basically got the green light, and Bob needed a cameraman and a producer, and he took Matt, who I think Matt was still in high school at the time, So Matt grew up being behind the scenes, kind of a cameraman, producer, doing a little bit. He's kind of a Swiss Army knife. He could do a little bit of everything, and like I said, I knew him. I'd seen him on camera for little NASCAR bits, NASCAR Eats and just the little bits and pieces that they would put around the race broadcasting. You'd see him quite a bit, and he kind of just had his name out there in the world. So, like I said, when when I first saw, I think I was just doing like a Facebook search, like, Lost Speedways or Abandoned Speedways, and seeing like what I could find, like pictures, whatever, and I found Lost Speedways, and it was like, Matthew Dillner's Lost Speedways. I'm like, oh, that's that camera guy from NASCAR. Like, I know that name, and it was just cool to see somebody with a NASCAR adjacent platform interested in something that, like, I was really interested, but I also recognized it was like pretty niche, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like something that everyone was into, I think, a good amount of people are in the racing history, but even fewer people are in the speedways themselves and their history and, how they close and where they go and what happens to them.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely something that I think we've always kind of had an interest in. Like, Alex, I know, brought up, we have a road course literally 30 minutes south of us, about 10 miles from Kentucky Speedway, wasn't it?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's called Bluegrass Motorsports Park. It was designed by Derek Daly, former Formula One driver. And they mapped out like the first course of what it's going to be. They almost finished paving it fully.
It looks fully paved when I look at it.
Yeah, and this was built 2009, and they just ran out of money and it never finished. Assuming that, of course, that was during the recession at the time. So, very interesting of what could have been if they were able to finish that project. And I've always been fascinated, about that area. I've driven by it many times, but I've never seen it up close, of course. So,
unfortunately, I guess now we have 2 Lost Speedways there now.
Yeah,
down in that area in Kentucky. Yeah, you got what, Bluegrass is closed and Kentucky Lake's closed, and
we've had Paducah closed.
Right, Paducah too. Wow. There was the old track that had they had a Grand National date there back, the first Kentucky track to hold a Grand National date, Corbin Speedway.
Yep.
I don't know, and I had heard that they were possibly trying to reopen it, and I don't know if they actually ever succeeded in doing so. But I've had that track on a map for a long time too. But
last I'd heard, it was back up and running with the more local division. Did they shut it down again?
I'm not sure. Like I said, I think it's quite possible they ran. I remember looking. I feel like when we were getting ready to do the second season of Lost Speedways, I was like just trying to see every track that was out there, and I came across Corbin, and I saw they were planning on opening, but it didn't look like they totally did or not. But it's quite possible they have.
Yeah, just one more question I had with the Lost Speedway scene. How did Dale Jr. eventually get involved in the project? Because I think that's who most people will associate it with it now, is the show he hosts on Peacock, Lost Speedway. So how did he kind of become involved in this sort of passion project that you and Matt Dillner had?
Well, so from my understanding is that while Matthew was still a cameraman for NASCAR, he and Dale knew each other from the tracks, and I feel like Dale approached him and said that he had seen Lost Speedways page and he thought it was cool, and I remember Matt telling me like, hey man, I talked to Dale, and Dale's like into this stuff, and he has his own map, like legitimately like has his own map, and it's like, whoa, that's like, for me, like that was a cool moment, because like I said, this was like a thing that like Matt and I both were really into, and like we recognized it being like kind of like very niche and like very nerdy, like for as far as racing goes, like it's really nerdy, but like having like arguably the biggest personality in the sport like validate it in some way and being like into it, that was pretty cool, and then we set out to do the calendars. We did a couple of runs of calendars there where we just had like pictures from the website on them, and I think I feel like I remember Dale like kind of being like a silent backer in that situation, and helping out with getting those made. And then really what did it was when Matthew got let go by NASCAR Productions, or during the transition, where NASCAR was forming NASCAR Productions. I forgot exactly how it went, but he was kind of looking for jobs in racing still, and Dale and Dirty Mo, snatched him up and brought him on as a producer. So I think, after working there for a while, my understanding is that Dale had, a contract with NBC, and he's a personality for NBC, and they asked him about shows that he might want to do, and he said Lost Speedways, So, Matthew and Dale went into a meeting with NBC, and next thing you know, they greenlit it, and we went for it, So it was just kind of this very surreal path to get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, having somebody like the caliber of Dale Jr. just coming and saying, "Hey, I want to do something with this project you guys have." That's seriously got to be a pretty crazy feeling right there.
Yeah, no, like I said, it was awesome because I've always admired Dale. I've always thought, like, from a far perspective or whatever, I've always admired him, and I always thought he was really cool and did cool things. Like, I remember when I was young, like, him being on MTV, and I was like, whoa, like, this guy's in the same music I'm into, and he's on MTV, and, like, this is cool, like, he kind of broke the mold for me. Like, I was used to racers being, like, way older and, like, kind of like country boys, and here comes Dale. He's like a rocker. He reminded me of myself, so I always thought he was rad. And then, like I said, when Matthew told me that he was, into the project, I was like, whoa, that's so, it's still pretty hard to wrap your head around it because there were so many years before he came in the picture where it was just, it's like me and Matt and our little community of Lost Speedways enthusiasts. And then to have him kind of come and tip the scale, it was like, wow, like of all the people, it was Dale. Like, it was pretty incredible. You know what I mean? So, no, it's absolutely, it's so surreal to have him involved, and he's such a great ambassador for, let's just say, the topic, for the movement. We call it a movement, he's a great ambassador because he represents all the best parts of it. He loves the research, he loves the history, he loves, preservation of history, and he is such a big part of the history of the sport. His name and his lineage is such a big part of the history of sport. So I can't think of a better, celebrity, for lack of a better term, to represent Lost Speedways than Dale. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
Obviously with your musical background and Dale Jr.'s, obvious musical interest. I mean, earlier this week, I think me and Alex saw a video of him introducing Linkin Park on stage at the VMAs. Yeah. Which I thought that was awesome.
That's what I.
Because that's like one of my favorite bands and my favorite all-time driver. In the same room there, you kind of combine them into one. It's like, that's awesome.
No, I know. That's what I mean. I remember being of age and I was watching that live, and I was like, wow, this dude, it's like it's a NASCAR driver. This is crazy. We got a NASCAR driver on MTV. Like, he broke the mold, and like I said, at that time, I was in, like, I've always been in the rock music, but I was, like, in the rock music. I was like, I like racing, but racing is such a, racing has so much Southern culture tied into it that it was like, if you went to racetrack, you just heard country music, and then all of a sudden, here's the biggest star in the sport, and he's on MTV, and he's talking about, like, bands like Nirvana and stuff. I'm like, wow, man, this is just, like, shattering my realm right now because, you're used to racing being one thing for so long, and then all of a sudden the biggest personality comes out, and he just, like I said, he just, like, tips the scale the other way. So he was, like I said, Dale was really ahead of his time. He kind of broke the mold, and he really changed the perception of race drivers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess something we could kind of lead that into is you're also the bassist for the rock band Cloakroom. And obviously we've seen that they've started to become a little bit more active lately just after the pandemic. So trying to balance, the racing and the music, like, what is that like?
Well, it's been an interesting time because, up until the pandemic, there was really no balance. I was just a musician that was a race fan. I've had no presence in auto racing until doing Lost Speedways. I was always just a fan. I was like, no one really. I'm still not really, but I was just a fan. I was just there with my parents and enjoying it, and I loved the sport. But I was always a musician. I've been a musician since I was 15, so more than half my life now. And then when the pandemic happened, and we weren't going to be playing any gigs or really doing anything, like, all of our plans got put on hold. That was right when Lost Speedways picked up. So it was sort of like it was just kind of like a seamless transition in a way where I didn't really have to worry too much about balancing things. And then now will be like the true test of that, because we have a new record that is due to come out next year, and it's gonna, we're starting to think about, if we're gonna do another season of Lost Speedways, when will that be, and where will that be, and what will that be like, and what time frame. So now I'm starting to like have to, theoretically place those pieces and be like, okay, well, if I'm doing this, I can't do that, and if I'm doing that, I can't do this, So I guess this will be, coming up in the months coming up will be a kind of a truer test to, how those things will balance, and what kind of, what kind of complications they'll have. But as far as I can tell, both things are so flexible, and thankfully, like a lot of the Lost Speedways work that I do, like the research and things I do from home in Indiana anyway. I'm not down in North Carolina like the rest of those guys are until it's time to film the episodes. And a lot of our shoots are so condensed. We do so much in a short amount of time. So if I had a touring schedule, it would probably theoretically be easy to kind of place it around any sort of production schedule for Lost Speedways. So I think I've been able to plan things well enough that it seems like I'll be able to kind of, if there's a, if we do another season of Lost Speedways, I can move into this new album cycle for Cloakroom, and it should work well, But yeah, like I said, up to this point, it's just been kind of like, well, I'm glad, I'm thankful for Lost Speedways, and I'm thankful that things have picked up in my career in racing, because honestly, if it wouldn't have, I don't know what I would have done, honestly, because it was like, I've been a full-time musician for more than half my life, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, you can't go on tour anymore. You can't do anything anymore, so you just better figure it out. And I was like, man, what am I gonna, what am I gonna do? This is all I've ever known, So, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I guess we'll see. But so far, it's been pretty cool. And the people at Lost Speedways are really, really supportive of Cloakroom, and are really psyched that I'm like in a band like that. I think they get charged up about it, and we're honestly, we're excited to go play in Charlotte so we can hang out with everybody. You know what I mean? And like, we're excited to try and work with like Dirty Mo on like video stuff. So like, if anything, it's kind of like opened up this weird world where like Cloakroom is used to existing solely in the music industry, and all of a sudden now we've got like these weird connections to the racing industry, and it's like my bandmates are kind of getting a charge out of it. They're like, wow, this is like a really weird time where all of a sudden, like, we've got like racing fans that are in the Cloakroom, and we've got like, racing people that are interested in the band, and like, race drivers and things like that. So it's been kind of a cool blend of the two.
Yeah. Does Dale Jr. listen to Cloakroom?
I don't know if he does. I think he's like aware of Cloakroom and aware of me being in Cloakroom, but I don't know. I can't speak that if he's ever listened to us, he hasn't said anything about it. I do know that we have we've got, so there's a kind of like an underground band from Illinois called Hum, H-U-M. They were like a bigger band in the 90s, like kind of had their like one-hit wonder on like, they were basically like in the fallout of Nirvana, when Nirvana was like breaking up. They were like a mid-90s band from Champaign, Illinois. And I remember Dale, like years ago in an interview, they asked him like what he was listening to, and he said this one Hum song, and I was like, whoa, that is so cool, because they're like a secret, like a an unknown secret band from the Midwest. I was so excited about that, And then fast forward to like 2014 or so, and Cloakroom ended up making a record with the guy from Hum in his studio down in Champaign. So we had this weird connection where like, the guy from Hum was like aware that Dale was into his band, and like, obviously I was a huge racing fan, and we were recording with him, so we talked about it a lot. And I think like Hum put a new record out, and I sent it to Dale, and like we talked about it. So like, I don't know, we've got some common ground there, but I don't really like to tell anyone like, oh, you should like check my band out. I'm not gonna like, Dale's the kind of guy that like every waking moment of his life, he's got people being like, Dale, you should do this. Dale, you should do this. Like, the last thing I want to do is be like, hey, man, like, thanks for having me on your show. You should listen to my band. You know, like, I think if he knows that we're a band and he knows we exist, so that's cool, you know, and if he listens to us, that's awesome. I know he likes a lot of bands that sound like us, so, you know, I think it would be in his wheelhouse, but we've never really talked about it before.
Yeah, and speaking of, like, Dale Jr. and the ties to music, too, I just remembered this. Wasn't there, like, one time, because I think I pulled a picture up here, yeah, where Dale Jr. actually gifted a guitar to Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters? That was red and had the number 8 on it.
Yeah. He also gave one to the guitarist of Chevelle too, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
right.
I said, he's always just kind of had his place there in the rock world. Like, I think rock musicians dig him because he's like really down to earth and he's cool and like he's obviously like a badass, you know. So like he's just kind of like an enigma, really. He's just like he's like a wild person. Like, he's like one of the few mega celebrities that's like super down to earth and like really approachable and fun to hang with. So like, me being a rock musician, I dig him the same way that like Dave Grohl would dig him. It's like, yeah, this dude's like cool. Like, even if you aren't in the racing, you're like, yeah, Dale's like the man. You know, he's like super cool. So like I said, he's always just kind of had his place there in the rock world. You know, even though he's not like really a musician. So.
Yeah, you know, I think that's one of the things that kind of drew me and Alex toward him is that, you know, we're also huge rock dudes ourselves. And so having a guy who kind of embodies that is definitely something that, you know, we definitely gravitated toward. I mean, I know Joey from the Hall of Fame gave me some shit about that, but, you know, it's, it is what it is, you know?
Yeah, shout out to Joey. Joey, he came to the Cloakroom show the last time we were in Cincinnati, and that was awesome. Like, that was a cool Worlds Collide situation for me because, like, I think that might have been the first time that, like, someone I knew from racing, like, crossed over into, like, my music world. And, like, he hung out and, like, met my bandmates, and we just had, like, a great time. And that was, like, honestly, that was, like, sort of the beginning of this weird world I'm in now where I'm, like I was just telling you guys, like I have like, you know, my music world, but then I have my racing world, and they're getting like closer and closer. The gravitational pull is pulling them closer and closer, and they're starting to like interact and hit each other, you know. And it's like, wow, this is like a crazy mix for so many reasons. But I don't know, racing people are so down to earth, you know what I mean? Like they dig everything, and I think like when they find out that like one of their own is doing something, they're supportive of it no matter what it is. Like, you guys have experienced that, I'm sure, you know, like racing people just like get into stuff, you know. So I think like I think they you know like if I found out that, you know, someone I knew that was like a race driver was in a band, I'd be all about it. Be like, wow, that's super exciting. I want to go see them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're ever doing another show in Cincinnati or even Indy somewhere, let us know, because I definitely want to come out and see that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we do our new record, we'll definitely we'll be traveling a lot, like more than we have in a long time. So we played Indy, we played Cincinnati, we played Louisville, and I'll definitely love to have y'all out and put you guys on the old guest list, and we'll hang out and have fun, man. Like I said, it's just like a fun environment to be in, you know.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And you know, and obviously something else I want to ask. You know, I know that we got to know each other from the Hall of Fame.
Right.
You know, so I can obviously tell you've taken some of that knowledge and put it towards the Lost Speedways, especially with the episode on Pennsboro.
Oh yeah.
You know, I definitely noticed a lot of stuff there that you know I really got to know about from the Hall of Fame, such as with Jim Dunn and just the history behind that place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I've been involved with the National Dirt Late Model Hall of Fame since its inception in 2001 via my dad. You know, my dad Bob is one of the leading historians of the short track racing world, and I've been his protege since I could formulate memories. You know, like some of my earliest memories were sitting in the bleachers with him at races and him just pounding racing history knowledge into my brain. You know what I mean? Like I probably struggled with learning, foreign languages in school and like arithmetic in school because I had so much racing knowledge in my brain from an early age. And that was just, me being a sponge and soaking up everything from, from my dad, just, my dad's experiences. And really, it's given me there's so many advantages to being his son and being in the position that I'm in, because anytime that I meet someone that is like a racing historian or we're speaking about something that has to do with racing history, I am a little bit on the ball, especially for my age. I'm only 33. I'm younger than a lot of these people are by a long shot. So I really credit him for that, and I'm so appreciative of him, like, trying to share his interest with me from such an early age, and like I said, that transition into being a part of the Hall of Fame, and I loved it. I loved learning the history. I loved meeting all the old drivers and like getting to like usher them into this Hall of Fame, and it was like their last right as like a race driver, like your career is over and like you think you have nothing to show for it. And it's like you're being recognized on a national basis for your accomplishments, and it's this beautiful thing. Michael, you've been there, you've experienced it. And so when we were going to do, Matthew and I talked about doing an episode, like a dirt late model episode for Lost Speedways. I'm like, well, dang, it's got to be Pennsboro. I mean, it's just, there's no other option. I mean, there are other options, but as far as the one that needs to be done first is Pennsboro. It's the most famous, one of the most famous one of the most famous dirt late model tracks, and obviously it's been closed for a long time, 20 years now, and so much history is there, and so much history from the Hall of Fame went down there. Like you referenced the Jim Dunn story. I mean, geez, like, does it get much better than that? I mean, you couldn't have, you would think we made it up. You know what I mean? It's like the circumstances are too perfect. It's like the perfect racing story. But yeah, like I said, just being at the Hall and soaking so much of that up, I was able to bring that story to the table. I remember having the meeting, in Mike Davis's office when we were talking about these tracks for season 2, and I told them that Jim Dunn story, and those guys were just hooked. Like, I remember them being hooked, and I'm like, this happened. I'm telling you, this happened. I've heard this story a million times since I was like the age of 10, and this happened. And there's a lot of people that care about this story, and man, like, how cool we got to put it on national TV. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for anyone who doesn't know about it, I don't know if we should tell them the story. I think maybe we should have them go watch Lost Speedways and check that out. But
I don't think I could tell it any better that's in the episode, because in the episode, if you haven't seen the second season of Lost Speedways, the Pennsboro episode, we bring out so many of the main characters, and I don't want to give away too much because it's a great story to go and watch. But we've got Carl Short, the old promoter of the racetrack. He promoted the race. We've got the guy that crewed on the car, Rocky Carr's there. We've got, just so many people that were involved in that day. So not only do you have me as like a talking head telling you like, this is what the history books say, you've got, firsthand perspective. You've got firsthand experience of people that were there that day and their take on it. And it's just a beautiful racing story, and it's such an awesome story for like racing underdogs. And I mean, like I said, it still gets me every time I watch it. It's amazing. I'm glad that we were able to, I guess I'm glad we were able to tell a story like that on a mainstream level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. And when you bring up, soaking in a lot of knowledge at a young age, I was the same way. How I got into racing was playing, which is a little different, racing video games, and then I rented NASCAR Thunder 2003 from Blockbuster back in 2004, and then I started watching races, and then, I had a history of NASCAR DVD, and I learned a lot about the sport with that, I had a 50 Greatest Drivers in NASCAR History book. And a funny story I have, and my dad loves telling this story, is I think it was Atlanta in '06. I went to the spring races there, and I was at the truck race. And these two guys behind me, I think, were talking like, did Terry Labonte ever win a championship? And I think he won like one maybe. And I remembered from the book, it was like, yeah, he won. So I turned around and said, yeah, he won 2 championships, 1984 and 1996. I was 8 years old.
Nice. Yeah.
And they're like, wow, okay. And
that's awesome.
I love it. That's what I love. It's just there's so much history, and that's another reason you talk about with Dale Jr. is bringing up the history. I remember he had a show on the old Speed Channel called Back in the Day with Dale Earnhardt Jr., and I used to watch that, and they would have like a bunch of old races from 70s and 80s that they would show on there.
Oh yeah. No, that show was cool. That was like a remix of the old Car and Driver episodes with Bud Lindemann, back in the day. And that show, if you haven't seen, so basically my understanding is, and like I do remember Dale's version of it, but like the old show back in the 60s and the 70s was Car and Driver, and it was hosted by Bud Lindemann, and he just had like a small film crew, and they would go not only, I think Dale did a lot of the NASCAR episodes. They would go to like short track races too. They went to an Oswego Classic for the super modifieds. They'd go to like Winchester. There were some really, really cool episodes, and they're out there. I've seen some on the internet, but most of them are, locked away, and I don't know if they'll ever see the light of day again. But that was one of the coolest shows back, early on TV for short track racing, And Dale, like I said, I think, him being a history buff, he got into that show, and through Speed Channels, they acquired the rights to those, and he was able to kind of, recut them and bring new life to them. So, yeah, just another example of Dale, being in the cool stuff and using his platform to bring a lot of eyes to it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's funny. It's funny that you talk about being 8 years old and regurgitating history. It's like we liken it to how we learn dinosaurs when we're kids. When you're like really young, and you somehow can learn all the dinosaurs' names, and they're like these huge words, and like you're like 5 years old, and you just know all the dinosaurs off the top of your head, and like what era they lived in, and what their diet was like, all the things that you see kids with dinosaurs. It's like some of us were that way, but with racing. You know what I mean? It's like all the racetracks, all the race cars, them all by number, who drove them. And then, like you said, like, taking a step further, NASCAR champions, you know what I mean? Like, that's funny. It's a funny comparison, I was just down at the Hall of Fame in August for our induction ceremony, and I met this great young kid. Oh, my God. I mean, he couldn't have been much older than 5 years old. His name was Oliver. And he and his dad came to the Hall, and they were fans of Lost Speedways. And this kid just blew my mind. And he schooled me. I mean, he knew more. He knew so much racing history. He knew a ton, and he was really on the ball in a way that I was blown away by him. And I'm like, this is our future historians right here. They get into it at a young age, and like I said, it reminded me of me. It's like you're into it from a young age, and you kind of just carry that. And a lot of that stuff you don't forget. And when you get older and you're like, wow, I really want to learn more about this stuff, you'll be surprised at how much you retain from your young years. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Alex, I think I probably had the same book you were talking about, and I remember just soaking up the information in that like a sponge. I mean, when you're young and you have that sort of interest in something, it just kind of sticks with you. And like I said, I do remember that other show that Junior held back in the day. I remember wanting to come home from school every day and turning that on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what's cool about racing history is that it's an endless well. So, with a lot of stuff that you get into, there's only so much of it. You know what I mean? Like, if you get into a band, they've only got so many records. Or if you get into, like, you know, a ball sport, well, there's only so many years of it. But with racing, there was so much racing going on. It wasn't just NASCAR, and it wasn't just USAC and IndyCar and AAA. There was so much racing going on. We'll never, ever be able to put a blanket over it. It's like a vast universe. You know what I mean? Like, that's still expanding to this day. But that's what's so cool about it. It's like once you really get the bug and you really get interested in this stuff, you can spend the rest of your life chasing it, because and you'll never get tired of it, because it's all relevant history, you know. But like, there's just so much of it. My dad and I talk about that probably every day. It's like, man, there's just so much. And you know, he's been studying racing his whole life. You know, he's over 65 now, and he's like, man, he's like, I saw a lot of it, and he's like, I'm still, every day I read something new that I never knew. You know, it's amazing. It's just, racing is unique in that sense, that like our history of our sport is so expansive, we'll never ever be able to lay eyes on the whole part of it. You know what I mean? And I think we're the only sport on the planet that is that way.
Yeah, I mean, of course, because you have so many different divisions and you got so many different series and tracks, you know, it's like you could research your whole life and still not even barely scratch the surface of what there is.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's overwhelming, honestly. I mean, I spend a lot of time overwhelmed with it, where I just always have, I've just got like notebooks of questions, not just statistics, but questions. Like, you know, I'll be chasing something, and then I'll see something. I'm like, whoa, when did NASCAR sanction this track? And then all of a sudden, you find yourselves with a bunch of questions, and it's like, well, I can't get off this task, but I got to remember to chase that. And like I said, you like you guys just said, you can spend your whole life chasing that and never get to the bottom of it totally. And so much of it's inconclusive too. You know, you'll chase something forever, and then it'll just be a dead end. And it's like, wow, that all of that for that. You know what I mean? And then maybe like 10 years from now, you'll be at a race and you'll meet some old timer. And he's like, yeah, I remember that. And it's like, whoa, here we go. Here's a new lead. You know what I mean? So it is just kind of an ongoing project, you know. But I do think that like people like me and you guys, being young and being interested in the history of the sport, I've you know, I would say doing Lost Speedways has shown me the importance of young people being interested in racing history, simply for the fact that a lot of the guys I've dealt with for the show are older, you know, and I don't mean to be dark, but there's going to be a day when, you know, a lot of these older historians that have been doing it for a long time, they're not going to be around for us to pick their brains, you know, and with them goes a lot of the sport's history, because a lot of it, it's not cataloged, you know. There's not yearbooks with all the facts in them, you know. It's a lot of it's just kind of out in the stratosphere, and I really do think that we have to have this mass movement of young historians come together and kind of be like, look, if we don't gather all this stuff up and like get it all into the sunlight, then when all these guys leave us, it's going to be gone. That chapter of our sport is going to be gone. You know, and we won't have it. We won't have that to borrow on. We won't have that to learn from. We won't have that to have perspective from. You know what I mean? So I've really made it my life's work. I know that sounds goofy, but I really have made it my life's work to just kind of be like, man, I really want to preserve this history. You know, at least like have it in a database or something where everyone can see it and know about it and learn from it. But like, it's a major concern of mine that, you know, every year we lose more drivers, more of the old drivers, and with them go their stories. You know, we lose historians, and with them go their stories. We lose photo collections. We lose racetracks. Like, it shrinks every year. You know, it's like, you know, it's kind of like an island, a shrinking island that we're on, you know, and one day we're just going to be in the water without all this stuff, you know, so.
Yeah, when you bring that up too, now I forgot to mention this earlier. Another example, when I was a kid, I found out that before Kentucky Speedway, there was a little egg-shaped 3/8 mile short track in Louisville. I used to live in Louisville as a kid. called Louisville Motor Speedway. And the Busch Series ran there a couple times in the late 80s, and the Truck Series ran there. And, guys like, Kevin Harvick and Greg Biffle started out at tracks like those in the Truck Series. And I was so fascinated because, I was like, I never knew about this. Now, of course, by the time I knew about it, the track was long gone. It was replaced by an industrial park. But, right off the outer loop, and I was just so fascinated with the history of that track and the design of it. And I think actually in this box over here next to me, earlier this year, an old coworker of my dad's who was a huge NASCAR fan sent me a box of a bunch of old NASCAR stuff she had. One of them, if I remember correctly, the very first, there it is. It's one of those seat cushions you get at a track. It's a Louisville Motor Speedway seat cushion that she gave me.
Cool.
That's one of the things she gave me. Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, you had this? So I love stuff like that. That's definitely a keeper for sure.
Well, when we all get together in the future, when all of us historians get together in the future and we open our museum, definitely keep that cushion so we can put it in there. That's a thing Matt and I always joke about. Every time we find artifacts and we find things, it's like, God, I've got so many like obscure little like memorabilia. It's like, well, just put it towards the museum. We'll do it in the future museum. So
that would be cool.
So that's cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I really am passionate about that. I'm passionate about there being a place. Because, like you just brought up a great point. And that kind of illustrates the point I was just making. That our sport is shrinking, whether or not anyone wants to admit it. It's shrinking. It shrinks every year. We lose more tracks. We lose more people. We lose more fans. We lose more drivers, and that's the sport shrinking. When we, there hasn't been a boom in motorsports since after World War II. That was the last time there was a major growth when there were tracks built, when there were an influx of drivers, and an influx of fans. That was the last time, and it's been steadily shrinking ever since then. Over the last 60 plus years. So there's gonna be a day. I don't think any of us can really predict, but it'll be during our lifetime. The three of us speaking right now, we're young enough, and people listening to this, we're young enough that we don't know what the makeup of the sport is going to be by the time we're our parents' age. For me, it's 30 years from now. I can't tell you what the sport's going to look like. It looks different than I thought it was going to look 5 years ago. More tracks have closed, schedules are different. There's less drivers have retired or died or whatever. So I really do think that as time goes on and as the sport progresses and the makeup of it changes, it is going to be important for these little places to pop up that are, representative of our sports history, whether it be a museum or, like I said, databases, collections, what it is. But they're like time capsules. You know what I mean? They're time capsules for someone like you that never went to Louisville Motor Speedway, but now you've got this tangible thing from it. You've got a little piece of it. You know what I mean? So it's really important that we find these things and we keep them and hold on to them. And like I said, we look towards the future knowing that, this stuff is all really important still. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and obviously talk about those changes that you just brought up. I guess we should talk about the new 2022 Cup Series schedule. We got quite a few things to talk about with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, to start things off, the Clash. Forever it's been in Daytona since they started the event in 1979. This year they ran it on the road course for the first time, but next year, February 6th, it's going to be ran at the Los Angeles Coliseum, a quarter-mile short track right inside the LA Coliseum. And I admit, I'm actually really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's a cool concept. For me, I've seen a lot of skepticism. Obviously, with change comes skepticism. But in my in my eyes, the key word here is exhibition race, right? Exhibition. Like when you think of a sport, a major organization in sports doing an exhibition, like think of like, you know how NHL does those hockey games, those outdoor hockey games, what is it, the Christmas Classics or whatever?
Yep.
And they do them like outdoors, and they do them in random places, but it's like an exhibition game. You know what I mean? In my eyes, that's what NASCAR is looking at here. It's like, this is an exhibition race. This is a race that its primary tool is to promote the brand. And it's like, well, you know, they've been holding it in Daytona, and I think it stopped serving its purpose in Daytona. You know, all of a sudden it just became kind of a dice roll. You know, you bring cars there, and you might leave with a bunch of cars on a flatbed by the end of it. You know what I mean? Like, the complexity of the exhibition race at Daytona has changed. And on one hand, you want to have your exhibition race at your brand's biggest facility, but on the other hand, I do think it's cool to hold not just a race, you know, not a Legends race, not like a hobby stock race, a NASCAR Cup race in a facility that doesn't, you know, that hasn't held racing in a really long time, especially, you know, oval track racing like that. So, and not only that, but it's a market that NASCAR is really trying to break into. You know, they're trying to bring back their Western ties. I think they miss Riverside. You know what I mean? They miss having that that strong LA turnout at the beginning of every season. And I think that their hopes are with their plans for Auto Club to redo Auto Club and turn that into something a little more racy. I think they really want to try to build on that momentum and having a race. It's going to be a highly publicized race because it's, you know, everyone and their mother is going to turn in to see what's going to happen. You know, NASCAR on a flat track, it's going to be like a quarter mile probably, right? You know, so what's this going to look like? You know, so I think that it's a smart move, really. You know, it's going to get a lot of different eyes on the sport, and all you can hope is that those eyes turn into weekly eyes, and it's not just like a flash in the pan. You know, even if you get, a few hundred new fans, it's a few hundred new fans that you wouldn't have gotten had you just held it at Daytona again, you know?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And, you know, I know people ask, you know, why not do it at Bowman Gray Stadium? Well, think, Los Angeles, it's the second largest market in America, and as you said, it's a market that NASCAR wants to tap into, and bring in that blockbuster hit feel to the race, and I think it makes, it was, when they announced it, it was one of the biggest trends on Twitter. You know, people are talking about it, and that's good.
Oh, yeah.
That's very
They
good.
will. As we get closer to it, you'll see it more and more. You know, like I said, I think it will be built up to be a big event. I think you've got your two schools of thought. It's like, don't fix what isn't broken. So obviously, North Carolina's NASCAR country, and you've got, multiple tracks that have been traditionally NASCAR tracks for a really long time. Bowman Gray, North Wilkesboro, Hickory. You move into, South Carolina, you got Greenville Pickens. There's so many tracks that NASCAR historically raced at. And that's NASCAR country. But then, NASCAR's been on a trend of trying to grow. It's been trying to outgrow that part of it. And they made the decision back in 1971 when they signed up with Winston to cut a lot of those short tracks away simply because they didn't hold, 60,000 people. And that's when you saw the growth. That's when you saw the super speedways getting built and everything. Because all of a sudden you wanted to take racing and put it on like a platform that was comparable to NFL or you know what I mean, a major sport in front of tens of thousands of people. And all of a sudden these tracks that were definitely a piece of NASCAR's history, but they held like 9,000 people or 10,000 people at the most. You know what I mean? So NASCAR saw that they couldn't grow. They could maintain very well, but they couldn't grow. So now, and then that gets into, well, in their effort to grow, they lost a lot of their fan base. Well, I mean, I don't think that there's any perfect scenario. I don't really think that they could win. in a lot of ways, because yes, they grew, yes, they went into new markets, they built in Kansas and Texas and all these major city areas, but then they lost a lot of their core fan base because of that, because all of a sudden now they weren't racing at North Wilkesboro, they weren't racing, like you said, Bowman Gray and Hickory and places like that. So I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to please everybody. Obviously we see that every time NASCAR announces something.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people who say we need to go back to the short tracks of the South, but if NASCAR's trying to grow, that's really the exact opposite of what we should be doing. We're trying to get this sport back to worldwide recognition, or at least nationwide recognition, which it's already starting to do that. We've seen that over the past year or so. NASCAR is starting to become more mainstream, and so as it's doing that, you have to adapt with the times. So going to a market like LA for a big exhibition race, which I think they also just announced it's going to be open invite, so that basically means anybody can show up. It's not going to be like the class years. So it's going to be like anybody who's willing to bring a car out will be able to go. And I'm just really interested to see how that's going to turn out, because obviously you have a much shorter track, and now you're going to have a much bigger field, because I feel like pretty much every big team's going to go out there, at least. Probably most of the small teams as well.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a good opportunity to be on TV. You know what I mean? Like, I think all those smaller teams are looking for TV time. So I anticipate everyone should show up.
Yeah, the sponsors, everybody involved, and obviously we also got the first kind of look at it in iRacing. We saw the folks on NASCAR Race Hub kind of take a spin at it.
Yeah, no, and that's cool. I'm glad we have that platform now that we can do that. We can visualize it. You want to have a street race in Chicago? Cool. Let's see what it looks like. You want to repave Atlanta and add more banking? Cool. Let's see what it looks like. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden now you have like a working example of hypotheticals. It's not just hypotheticals on paper anymore. All of a sudden now you have something that you can simulate, and I think as NASCAR moves into the future and starts analyzing their schedule and starts thinking about these changes, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. All of a sudden they've got a partner that they can work with to be like, hey, what if we wanted to, do this? What would it look like? Okay, cool. Well, Steve Myers and the crew go to work, and next thing you know you've got Dale Earnhardt Jr. on his show doing it, and everyone can tune in and see it. You know what I mean? So, I think that I'm sure they tested on the Coliseum before they even announced it. They probably were like, is this even something that will work? What will it be like? Will it produce good racing? Will it produce a good product? What will it be like? And they probably tested it and were like, well, this will work. Let's go for it.
So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. There is another new track that got added to the Cup schedule. It's kind of close to home because I have a lot of family in the St. Louis area. Gateway is getting a Cup date next year, June 5th.
Yeah, I just find it awesome because it's like 11 years ago, this track was shutting down. We weren't sure if we were ever going to see it in any capacity again, and now it has a Cup date.
Yeah, kind of like Nashville too.
Yeah, exactly. I think that if if NASCAR has any tracks in their stable that they're not currently using, I think that they should all be fair game and in consideration. I look at not only those tracks that you just mentioned, Nashville and Gateway, but Iowa, which I literally just drove by. I'm in Knoxville. I just drove by it. Even, like Pikes Peak, places like that, haven't been run at for a Cup race in a long time. I say, why not? I think the more variety that you can bring to the schedule, the better. I think it'll put, and I think that type of that type of move will really kind of scratch the itch that everyone has. I think a lot of people, like we just talked about, people are upset about NASCAR moving away from the short tracks and moving away from their fan bases. But then NASCAR is trying to grow. They're trying to grow into new markets. So it's like this could really kind of answer to all of that. You've got short tracks spread out throughout the country that could work for a NASCAR race, a NASCAR Cup race. You've got different markets, but at the same time, they're short tracks. So you're kind of staying true to that short track culture. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, we definitely get that. There's definitely part of me that says, yes, we need to be going to more short tracks, but there's also part of me that says, is that really possible? And, yeah, I think it's possible with some of them. Like, I think Lucas Oil Raceway would be a great place to go, which, granted, I may be a little bit biased with that, having raced there and having kind of built sort of a relationship with the track. But, I know they're supposed to be making some renovations. And, of course, we've also got places like Memphis or Pikes Peak that I think could be fair game. And I've even heard rumblings about Wilkesboro maybe making a comeback. I know Rockingham's trying to do that too, even though I don't know if that would really fall under the short track label.
Yeah, I mean, the complication is that you've got, contracts with the bigger speedways that get the 2 dates. But I think a lot of the drivers and a lot of the fans would love to see a real tour where they're racing somewhere different every week, and there aren't a lot of there isn't a lot of duplication, or a revolving schedule too is another good option. But man, get in touch. Get you've got all these great facilities that are special events only facilities that are vacant. Look at Newton. Like Newton didn't have any racing this year. Really. So. Or you got Kentucky, you've got Chicagoland, you've got all these places that are just sitting. They're like massive properties that are just sitting, and they're going to end up getting bulldozed. And then, like I said, our sport's going to shrink more. So I think that NASCAR, I don't know if they're, I wouldn't say, maybe they're kind of realigning their expectations where all of a sudden it's like, look, we don't need to try to get 100,000 people to a race every weekend. We should fill these places up. Let's go to Kentucky and sell it out. Let's go to, Memphis and sell it out. Let's go to Pikes Peak and sell it out. Because when we all turn on a race on Sunday and the grandstands are packed on camera, and it's a raucous environment, we feed off that. We're like, hell yeah, NASCAR's killing it. Like, they're coming back. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But I think, NASCAR kind of hit a lull there where there was a lot, you're seeing a lot of empty seats, and I think they were feeling that. They were feeling the decline, and I think now they're kind of, they're improvising. They're sort of just trying stuff out and figuring it out. And I think that, like, if you're really a fan of the sport, if you're really a fan of NASCAR, you want NASCAR to stick around, okay? And it wasn't going to stick around doing what it was doing, I think that any change is at least, it's admirable that they're trying, that they're not just like, look, this works and we're going to do it. You know what I mean? At least they're trying to figure things out. So I'm excited. I'm excited for the new racetracks. I'm excited to see what it looks like. I'm excited for the new car. I'm sure you guys have talked about that a lot. Who's going to be competitive, mm-hmm. which team's going to be competitive, which manufacturer. Like, this just 2022 is kind of an enigma. We don't know what we're going to get yet. It's going to be cool. It's like it's a big opportunity for NASCAR to kind of reinvent themselves in a lot of ways. So
brand new era.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that they Nashville looks like it did well. The Circuit of Americas, that race looks like it did well. Road America did well. All the things that they tried this year seemed to be, for the most part, pretty well received. And a lot of the tracks mm-hmm. they usually go to, that they've been going to, those are the ones that I see drawing the most criticism. So it's like, keep trying new stuff, guys. You guys, you're on to something here. So mm-hmm. as long as they don't do too much to burn the drivers and burn the smaller teams, and I do think that they're conscious of that. I think that we as race fans, we should be excited that the arguably the most recognizable organization in America right now, at least the one with the most eyes on it, they're trying new things. They're trying to do different stuff. They're trying to grow the sport. So, it's going to be an exciting year.
I agree completely.
Yep. I think we're all looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else we wanted to bring up real quick?
I don't think so.
Cool.
All righty. Well,
I think that just about wraps up for today.
Awesome,
yeah,
man.
That was a fun racing hour.
Yeah, thank you guys. I was going to say, I meant to say earlier, of all my years of doing interviews, this is the first time I've done like a racing one. It's usually about my band or something, musical related. So it was fun to talk racing with you guys and kind of get into some stuff. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and having me on.
Of course.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Right on.
All righty. I'll go ahead and sign us all off here. Once again, thank you, Bobby Markos, for joining us here on this edition of the Dropping the Hammer Racing Hour from Michael Klein and myself. I'm Alex Gray signing off, and we'll see you next time.